In this episode, we talk with Jim Johnson about how to bring honor to you and your house. This is STA Engage. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, as always, Dr. RPG Jeff Harvey. Last episode, we had a special guest on ELH, and we talked about how to play Star Trek Adventures online. It's a great episode. Check that one out if you play a game online or if you want to know how to play the game at all, really. It's a great episode. Check that one out. Before I get too deep into this episode, let me introduce to you my co-host, the indomitable Michael Dismuke.
Hello again, everyone. Happy to be here. That's how you say it in Klingon.
You know, I have Duolingo, and after I learn Swahili and German, I'm going to learn that. So
someone will correct me. Watch.
No doubt. The goal of this show is to help fans of Star Trek and of role-playing games better engage with the Star Trek franchise and the Star Trek Adventures RPG, as well as the community at large. This show is brought to you by the letter D, the number 7, and the support of people like you. So like, subscribe, and share. Support us on Patreon. You can find out more about all the folks that sponsor us and put the show together. Our production team at Studio Tembo, the fine folks over at continuingmissionsta.com, and our primary sponsor for the season 1, Adventure Inc. Just follow the links below. This episode, we're going to be discussing the Klingons. Everything from the new core rulebook, creating Klingon campaigns, Klingon houses, Klingon characters, Klingon NPCs, Klingon ships, Klingon coffee. There's Klingon scampi, barbecued Klingon, boiled Klingon, Klingon gumbo, pan-fried, deep-fried, stir-fried. You get the picture. And to help us out, please welcome our returning guest, the product manager and line editor. I had to correct those things because I was wrong earlier. The Star Trek Adventures, the very patiently waiting Jim Johnson. Jim, how are you?
Hey, how are you, Jeff? Michael, good seeing you guys again. Thanks for inviting me in to play with you all again.
Always happy to have you on the show.
Always room for one more. Always room.
Always room.
Thank you.
Let's start out by talking about the Klingon core rulebook. So, I mean, my first question is why a core rulebook and not a supplement book?
Sure, great question. So I think, I know I've answered this before in other forums, but I mean, really, the opportunity presented itself to do a really big book on the Klingons, because I even wrote in the book itself, I think they're arguably the most popular species in the Star Trek universe, next to maybe Vulcans. And there is just a wealth of material for Klingons, not just the language, but the lore. I mean, there's just so much out there for Klingons, right? And so there was that, right? But then in addition to that, just knowing that there's a lot of stuff for the Klingons that we could put into a supplement, we also knew that after 3 years of working on the game, that we knew that a lot of the fandom were struggling a little bit with the core rule book, the way it was laid out, and how the rules are kind of scattered throughout the book, and constantly had questions about the rules. And we thought to ourselves, well, this is an opportunity to kind of create an alternate path into the game, where instead of playing a Starfleet crew, you're playing a Klingon crew, a dedicated Klingon crew. And wouldn't it be kind of nice to give the core rule book a little bit of a refresh, right? I mean, it's not even a version 1.5. It's just really just kind of a revised version of the rule book, because we didn't really change hardly all that much except the layout and the presentation, which was really one of my key design goals, was to let's clean up the presentation, make the rules a little clearer, do a top-down edit, and clean it all up. And at Gen Con in 2019, Sam and I were talking about it, and we were like, well, this is probably a good opportunity to jump on this and do a full-blown core book, as opposed to just a supplement that you kind of tack on to what was already in place, So
I know I have a lot to say positive about the rules and how they were simplified, because we get a lot of questions. We have a lot of fan-made items on continuing mission. But speaking of just design alone, because I want to make sure we don't skip over just the aesthetics of these books. Mm-hmm. I actually got mine in the mail a couple days ago. The feel of it is great. I was cracking up on a couple things, which I have to mention, Jim, and maybe you could talk to us about it. This is the first time I've ever had an RPG book that actually has bookmarks in it. Uh-huh. Of course, they're the color of the Klingon flag, which I thought was super brilliant. How did you make certain design choices like that, and also like the leather, the SWAT, like how did you do that?
Gosh, well, we knew we wanted to, well, we knew we were going to do a core book, right? And then once we decided on we're going to do a core rule book, we naturally looked to the Starfleet core and said, okay, we did a collector's edition and a standard edition of the regular core book. Do we want to do that again? And we were like, yeah, because there's enough of a fan base that would probably be willing to pay a little bit more for the collector's edition, even though the only thing that's different is the cover, right? I mean, all we're doing is putting a leather cover on it. But some people like me care about that kind of aesthetic, and
it makes it feel. Yeah. Well, let me tell you, one, it makes it feel biblical, which I really love. It's like oh, there's wisdom in this. I can't wait to see actually how it looks, like in 10 years. I may throw it in the dirt a couple times, put some blood and coffee on it. Yeah, but it's definitely fireplace reading, which I really like it. So I buy the rule books and stuff like that. I do use PDFs, but I know I read this whole thing in PDF, but once I had it in my hands, I got some stuff out of it that I didn't know. But for anyone who's wondering or vacillating on whether they should get the leather one, it feels so nice.
Yeah, one of the nice things about having the special edition covers too is that if you have the PDF, you can use the PDF, and you have a reason to buy a collector's edition book, because you can put it in your shelf and still have a book you can read and not damage it. I love the collector's editions. I buy a lot of them now.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Michael, I'd be curious to see what happens, because over years, leather gets that kind of the grease, the patina on it. I can't wait to see what it looks like in 10 years, see if it holds up.
I want that. I really think that would be a really cool thing. I think also going back to what you were saying too, because I didn't want to skip over it, because some people would be like, why buy a second core rule book? And believe me, I make no money off of this, by the way. I'm just saying it because what I liked about it when I opened it up, it had a whole section on Klingon culture. And there's no way you could have got that richness of Klingon culture in a book that shares with other species. And for those who are going to play this game or GM the game, it's just a quick reference I would have my players read to be like, hey, this is what you need to know about Klingon culture, because it does change the way you behave from standard Federation protocol.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. I will go back and just say real quick with the bookmarks, the collector's edition of the Starfleet core rule book, the one with the 1701D on the cover, that actually has 3 bookmarks in it. And those bookmarks, I remember Sam told me that he put a lot of effort into making sure that the Pantone color numbers matched the original series uniform colors. So like if you look at the gold and the red and the blue bookmarks in the Starfleet core, like theoretically those are supposed to match the colors of the uniforms that they used on the show back in the day, which I thought was a great attention to detail.
That's cool.
And while we were planning this book, at first we were just going to do the leather cover and not do bookmarks. And then I think one day I posted on our internal site and said, hey, is there any way we can add bookmarks to this? It would just be nice to have. And it didn't impact the cost all that much. So we went with it and did the bookmarks, because I know that I appreciate having them just to highlight the really, really key stuff, even though I always put Post-it notes in my books, because they're working tools for me. So I don't really care about keeping them pretty.
Yeah.
The only other books I've seen that have them are some of the Chaosium books, like Call of Cthulhu, and those are nice. I really like them. And I didn't realize that the collector's editions of either of these books had them, and that's another selling feature for me. So.
Yeah, it's cool. It makes them more classic. It makes them more classic. And then the other piece, again, I'm not going to go too much into the rules, because I think we've talked about that enough. People know how we simplified that. But just the fact that they added all these mission briefs at the end, which was a new addition. I don't think there's no other mission briefs in any other published material as of yet, right?
No, the Klingon book is the first place to that I was able to introduce them, and you'll see a lot more of them coming up here. But the Klingon book was the first place that we could bring them in.
Nice. I will say that my players definitely approve of the fact that the rules are restated, because they were difficult for some of my players to wrap their head around the rules the way they were presented in the previous book. So many of my players appreciate the work that was put into redoing the rules layouts. So
there was one I have a question about, by the way, since I have you trapped here, Jim. so I noticed that the milestone, there's no more spotlight milestone in this one. In fact, I just noticed it once I got the hard copy book. So in the original series, or in the original book, there's normal spotlight and arc milestones. I noticed this one, no spotlight milestone. What was the thinking behind that?
I'd have to ask Nathan what the specific point was to that, but I do know he wanted to kind of take a fresh pass on the advancement system, such as it is. And I think like the concept of the spotlight milestone is still in there. It's just reframed differently. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the things I'm not going to answer your question because I can't, but one of the things I like about his revision is that it encourages players to keep a log of what they're doing. And it really puts the, I don't want to say onus, but the players are really encouraged to own their character development. And, you know, working with the GM to figure out, you know, oh, in this episode, I'm going to do this, and then I'll carry that forward into the next episode, et cetera. And I think it just makes it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more organic. And I know that my players in my current campaign, we were playing a Starfleet game, but since we have these rules available, we're just using the Klingon version of the rules because I like when they use a trait that they can actually tweak their character, right? They can tweak it. They can tweak a talent, or they can tweak a focus, or whatever, without necessarily, you know, going too far down into the weeds on it. So yeah,
it's definitely worth rereading. I'm gonna have to go back into details like that because again, those are some details I still didn't catch through the PDF. I only caught when I'm flipping through it today and looking at stuff. There was also one other rule change I have to have. So which I really like is contested challenges, which it was more extrapolated here. So if people want to know some of the differences, is that challenges in the original one, you know, you go do your extended task or whatever, but now they have it where they really expand on how you can oppose that to make that task even harder, almost like an opposed role when you're fighting. It's opposing a challenge. So I thought that was a real cool addition in here.
Yeah, we tried to add a little bit, but you know, Nathan also, because Nathan works on all the 2D20 systems or all the 2D20 versions, he was able to kind of, you know, his brain is in like 10 different places because he's working on so many different games right now. He's been able to kind of like take the best of breed and adapt it as needed. So you know, the Klingon book benefited from his 3 extra years of experience working on 2D20 on various and sundry lines. So you know, I'm grateful that he was able to do as much as he did on this book, even though he's being pulled a couple of different directions.
Yeah, I noticed there were some other differences too. Like there's the difference with the reputation that changed a little bit, and I think that was released as an additional PDF, and a few other things too. It's definitely a book that you need to go over, even if you don't buy the physical copy. I think the PDF is definitely worth having.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. I mean, I use the PDF as reference all the time, and I know that Nathan and Sam they did the primary bulk of the work revising the mechanics. And again, they didn't make a lot of changes, but they just streamlined a lot of things. And then, you know, working with me, we just made the presentation a lot clearer. Hopefully fans will think it's clearer than what we had in the first version. But just cool. You know, trying to make it easy for people to get the system and then get playing.
Yeah. One last thing on design, just because that, you know, I started work as a graphic designer, so I noticed these little things. I thought it was really cool how they painted or did all these warriors' weapons. I thought that was so cool because in the original book, it tells you what the weapons are, but it doesn't really show them. And I think from a GMing and player standpoint, knowing what a cut looks like before it stabs you is kind of important. You're like, don't stab me. That's worse than getting stunned.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. They put the design. And then my last question to you, Jim, and then I'm done, is why the rib cage for the woman who got shot on page 166? I mean, they just blasted her. They totally atomized this poor Bajoran officer.
So yeah,
good art, great work.
Yeah, I can't take any credit for that piece of art. That art is actually from the I think it's in the Alpha Quadrant source book, and the Alpha Quadrant source book, I was the line editor, but I wasn't the project manager yet. I think that was one of Sam's last books that he worked on as project manager before he moved on to bigger and greater things within Modiphius. And I think he wrote that art brief. And when I saw it in the book the first time, I was like, "Whoa, what is this? This is crazy! What are we doing?" And but no, I thought it was, I mean, neat and different. It just shows you the brutality of the war at the time, right, when the Klingons and the Federation were at war with each other for a little while.
And even the difference in the weapons, which I think is why I pointed out the weapons and then that picture, is because players need to understand being Klingon is a whole different thing from being Federation. I know Jeff has a lot to say about that subject too.
Yeah, I do. And I'll say those pictures. This is just a little factoid for people that they'll never know unless I mention it somewhere. Those weapon graphics. Those are actually we were able to get those from Eagle Moss. So Eagle Moss is, of course, the UK company that does the Starship miniatures and the graphic novel subscription, a bunch of other stuff with Star Trek. and I'm working on building a relationship with them to where we can kind of like cross-pollinate and stuff. And they were gracious enough to give us some of their art assets that we were able to drop into the Klingon book, and just kind of like, keep that cross-pollination going. So I'm really glad that we were able to get some of those graphics in there. As far as layout and design, I have one comment, and then I have one question for both of you. The first comment is, I was really grateful to do this book because it gave me an opportunity to put in a acknowledgments section at the very end. So if you look at the end of the index, I want to encourage every fan to read that acknowledgments section, because it was an opportunity for me to thank a lot of people, and the other writers, to thank a lot of the people involved in Star Trek, but also that last paragraph, because I know that we've lost so many people over the years that worked on Star Trek to one degree or another, and we're all, building on the legacy that they all created. And I wanted to make sure I had a place somewhere in one of these books to just acknowledge how many people have brought Star Trek to so many other people, and that we're just trying to continue that tradition on. So I want to make sure everybody has a chance.
That's excellent. I'm going to sit back with, if you can. I'm going to sit back with some whiskey and read it tonight. Pour one out for the homies.
Yeah. And then my question for both of you, because you've both seen the PDF and you've certainly seen the physical version, just out of curiosity, what do you think of the dark text on white background as opposed to the light text on black background that's in all the other books? Does this make it more readable? Is it more user friendly, or is it just kind of like not that important to you?
I will say that it doesn't show fingerprints as well, and that's one thing I like. But I really like the aesthetic of the black pages, and the LCARs and all that stuff. I think it looks really good. The only real complaint I had with it, it is a little bit harder to read because some of the lettering, the black bleeds over some of the lettering, and it shows fingerprints. And gamers are always eating Cheetos and whatnot, and my books are smudged really badly. So
yeah, on PDF, black definitely, because it's easier on the eyes instead of having the light shine on your face. That's for sure. But definitely, I do like the white. It's easier to read when lighting's in the room bouncing off of white background paper. That's how our eyes are kind of built. It's less strained, so I do prefer that.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that feedback. I appreciate it.
I would say that it also makes, if you got to print out a single page or whatever, if you having the print versions, which are the white backgrounds.
Sure.
So I do like that, but I don't print a lot of pages. So.
Right. Okay.
Let's talk about character generation and how it differs in the Klingon book than it did in the Star Trek Adventures core book. So, go ahead.
Should I just ramble, or do you want to guide?
Oh, I didn't really have anything specific on it. I just know it differs a little bit. I know that some of the talents are different, and there is no STA.com Modiphius creator for it right now. But I know that like there are some differences, but for the most part, it pretty much works the same. But
yeah, for the most part, character generation hasn't changed. It's still primarily life path is the key way to go about it. You work through the different steps and build your character as you go. You can of course create your character. There's a creation and play option that was in the first book. There's a couple supporting characters rules. But as far as the life path, the big difference between this book and the Starfleet book, of course, is that you've only got two types of, or only two species, I guess. You got the Klingons, and then you got the augmented version with the virus. Whether you're playing original series or next gen or whatever. Beyond that, though, like you go through your environment, you go through your different stages of your life, right? None of that's really changed. Some of the nuances are a little different because we obviously wanted to make this focused on the Klingons and not just have it kind of be like the core rules with a Klingon aesthetic bolted onto it. We really tried to do a top-down revision to make it really, really, really Klingon focused. So a lot of like the career events, Nathan and I scrubbed, or Nathan mostly scrubbed the career events to make some of them more Klingon focused as opposed to Starfleet. And then the big thing was adding the whole section about creating your own Klingon noble house. Because that just doesn't exist in Starfleet. And we were like, if you're going to create a Klingon character, it really matters to most Klingons what house you're a member of or where you're from. And so why not have an opportunity to build that? And even Nathan went even further to say, not only can you build your house, but there's also some elements in there about maintaining it, right? You can actually spend some of your milestones on improving your house as opposed to improving your character, right? You can actually have that whole element of working on your legacy to some extent, which I thought was a really neat idea.
Yeah,
That was
I haven't
brilliant.
gotten deep into those rules on the generation of the houses yet, or how to
Mhm.
maintain them. But when I first read that, I thought back to I think it's Green Ronin created the Song of Ice and Fire RPG, and
Mhm.
they have something similar to that. And it really got me thinking about how to run a Klingon campaign, and how to make players think like Klingons.
Yeah.
And really, if you think hard about the way Klingon society is structured, I think that Game of Thrones is a really good example
Mhm.
for a Klingon campaign. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
And
when I read Nathan's draft, it immediately got me thinking of Pendragon. If you played any Pendragon as an RPG, a huge chunk of it is just maintaining your castle, maintaining your house, maintaining your family, and then of course it's a generational game. So like your main character could die at some point, and then his son carries on the story, and you just kind of go through this whole generational thing. And I just thought it was neat that Nathan was able to build that into the rules.
What
that's
I
what
like about it too is the parallel, whereas, we spend a lot of time talking, if you're a Starfleet member, about why'd you go to the academy? Where'd your family come from? And so that just transfers over to the whole idea of your house,
Right.
and the richness and the drama and the stories and all of that. And of course, again, going back to page 96 and 97, which is the chapter on life path character creation, it's been simplified, has some good visuals in it to really streamline you being able to create quickly.
So when you guys are making characters for Star Trek, and particularly the Klingon campaign, what are the thought process behind when you're generating your character? Like, what are you thinking about? What makes your character generation more unique? Like, how do you guys visualize your characters are going through it with the Klingons?
I can think of one word to start, because I've only been able to play one wonderful game as a player. Usually I'm always the GM. And the word came up, which was at the forward of the book, was passion. So I had to decide what my character was passionate about, and I just drowned my character in it. She was a flight controller without a house. She had no house, and she had escaped Rurapimpe. So she was passionate, about talking about how if she can get through Rurapimpe, she could survive anything. And she was passionate about flying stuff. And it just made her just intense. That's the word I'll use right now for that. So that's one way I generate is, just figuring out what they're passionate about and running with that.
Yeah, I think if I have not had an opportunity to play a Klingon game yet, or even run one, but like if I were to approach creating a character for a Klingon game, I would harken back to Dr. Lawrence Schoen's foreword to the book that he was gracious enough to write for us. And exactly what you said, Michael. Klingons are passionate. They're very, very passionate. They're always passionate about something in specific. And so on the one hand, I would, figure out what is my character passionate about. But what's always important to me, especially for Star Trek role-playing games, is figuring out how is my character connected to all the other player characters, right? Are we in the same house? Are we all related? Is there a connection that we have together? Because it's really important to be able to have things to bounce off of each other, so that you're all not just new people on the bridge. Like, who are you? Who are you? It's like, no, it's nice to build some backstory together in this, the traditional session zero kind of thing. So those are the two things I focus on: is what is my character passionate about, and then how is my character connected to all the other player characters.
I like that. Which one of you bastards killed one of my ancestors? I love that.
Yeah, we did a single one-off for a Klingon game recently, and I made a character who's one of the other players was his brother, and we wrote a basic story of, we're disgraced members of a proud but small house, and we ended up having a fight off to see who was going to be the new first officer aboard the ship, the Black Batleth. And it was all players versus players, which we need to talk about PvP rules at some point in this game. In the end, it was the two brothers fighting off, and I decided that my character, who was the lesser warrior, really would do whatever it took to win, because he wanted to prove that he had still had his honor, even though their father had basically cast them both out, that he was still worthy of it. And I think it was a fun moment to roleplay, and I ended up winning the fight. Mostly because if it had gone another, not even another round of combat, if it had gone the other player had a chance to talk and didn't resign from the fight, I would have, because I had like one hit point left. It was a brutal fight. There was some injuries. So let's talk about like building the houses and what kind of things we do when we're thinking about building a Klingon house? What kind of stuff? Again, so players, this is something new for this system,
Right.
and I haven't gone through it yet. So let's talk a little bit about what it is to build a house. Like, what are some of the things you think about? What are some of the steps you would go through when building a house?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the great thing is Nathan put together a whole, I mean, the house creation and development is almost like the life path, where you've got charts and you just kind of follow it through step by step to figure out, where is your house? Is it like up and coming, or is it an old retiring house, or is it, is it like Kang, the House of Kang, that has this long, prestigious history over hundreds of years? Like what is this house? What is this house's personality? And then you just kind of keep digging into it, and like, what's the legacy? What type of characters come out of that house? Are they predominantly warriors or scientists or engineers, or that kind of thing? And so I haven't really had an opportunity to play with it much, but I would say, if you're a new player coming into it, just go through the house creation and development. I mean, it's only like 5 or 6 steps, so it shouldn't take you long to do it, and just play with some of the ideas that are in there. And then think about, even without the character generation rules, you can just look at canon to come up with some of the concepts, like, are you from a noble, prestigious house that has a seat on the High Council, right? Is there a political element to your campaign that you can fold in, right? And depending on where your campaign is set, like, maybe you're set in early next gen era, and like, is your house pro Duras, or pro Gowron, or pro somebody else? And like, you can add in this whole political element, like, are they okay with the Romulans having a hand in this, or are they like anti-Romulan? Or you can even play with the idea of, in early next gen, you had this whole undercurrent of Klingons in the setting that were not really happy about being allies with the Federation, right? I mean, they were kind of okay with it, but they really wanted to get back to that traditional, we are Klingon warriors, we're going to go take what we want and be passionate and do this thing, and we don't really like being allies with the Federation anymore. There's a couple of NPCs in there that I dropped in from the, what was it? Heart of Glory, I think. The episode where a couple Klingons came on board and they got in the brig, and then they put together the modular pistol, and then they escaped, and then of course they both got killed. But their particular attitude was like, we're allied with the Federation, but we're not really happy about it. They were, I guess, traditionalist Klingons, maybe. And so, as you're playing and developing your character and your house, where does your house stand on this? Is your house a traditionalist kind of house, and they want to, they're not really happy with the Federation, and they want to kind of break away from that and do their own thing? Or, there's just a ton of options there if you want to play with it.
Yeah, I think one thing that a lot of players think of when they first see that there's a Klingon book is it's like, oh, we're going to be heavy in combat, and we're going to be killing everyone, and Klingons always like killing people. But I think there's an underlying thing that people don't generally think about, which is the level of politics that there really is in the Klingon stuff. I think it's actually more political than the Federation stuff. The Federation has these high ideals, and they've achieved their goals largely, and now it's about exploration and spreading humanity throughout the universe. But with Klingons, it's really a lot more of power struggles and political vacuums and things like that. And I think I think Game of Thrones is a really good example of a way to visualize a Klingon campaign and make it really interesting for players.
Yeah. I was thinking of adding too, as opposed to just values. Their values are oftentimes built off of stories. I was going to write an article about it. I was trying to think how I would do it, because I honestly do think that playing Klingon games is more satisfactory to storytelling players who like to tell stories and are very artistic and poetic. I think it leans. So I'm like, if there's a value, I would ask my players, create the story behind this value. It could be embellished, it could be a lie, it could be exaggerated, but basically you have to tell it so fervently that if anyone challenges that story's veracity, they've just challenged your value. Right. And so I would make all of my players create some stories for their houses, true or false, that maybe they fight about later.
Yeah, I think, and I've seen this on social media here and there about people wanting to play Klingons, and I think it's easy to look at the Klingons as kind of like the murder hobos of Star Trek, where they're killing machines, they go out, they kill stuff, they take what they want, and then they move on to the next thing. But that's not really what you see in canon, right? There's a whole, I mean, it's not just the honor thing, but like the vast majority of Klingon episodes have this very, very strong, like, Shakespearean vibe to them, right? Like they are fraught with high drama and high. I mean, there's just stuff, right? If you watch what's the one with the first one with Worf, Sins of the Father, right? You got this back room politicking going on between Worf and Duras and Kempek and Picard, and they're like, this is big, King Lear type stuff that's going on. And I think to just look at the Klingons as like, oh, we're just going to go kill stuff and take their loot and go, that you're just selling it short. And I think there's just so much more to the Klingons that you can do. And so I love your idea, Michael, of having your players create stories around all their values and their house and just everything else, even if it's total BS. Right, it's a good story, and I think the Klingons like to drink their blood wine and tell good stories, and go on from there. So I think there's just a lot more to the Klingons than just, if you go on the surface, that's one thing. But I think the Klingons, have more than anybody else, I think you can really go deep and even go deeper with them.
If my players write a song, I'll give them an extra determination point if they make a song.
I will say too, like you're talking about the Shakespearean aspect of it. There's a lot of Shakespearean callbacks in Star Trek in general, but Gorkin is quoting Shakespeare in what, Star Trek 6, right? Yep. So there's definitely an element of that, and I think keeping that in mind, that it isn't just about being a murder hobo. There is some of that in there, but it's not just that. Let's talk about honor real quick. Like that is the thing that Klingons are the most known for, right? But is their honor the same as human honor? Like we think of things like you don't attack an unarmed enemy, or you never attack someone from behind, or you always offer mercy. But to Klingons, there's nothing more honorable than victory, right? So how do you guys envision a character using honor? Like how do we separate human honor and chivalry from what Klingon honor would be?
That's a good question.
This is again, I'm going to go back to I picture Kelly Fitzpatrick, who's she's one of the writers, and she loves acting and role playing. And I picture, and I talked to her, we had interviewed her before about her contributions. And it's how like when your honor is challenged, can you poetically get out of having to do the fight? Because we know challenging, you got to take up the challenge. There's a whole inbox about that. So it's even when you're doing something dirty or wrong, can you wrap it into a story as to no, actually why this is honorable is because. So I think again, this leans toward creativity and twisting the world to your view. We're used to, we see people do that all the time, right? I'm not making any comments in politics, but if you're strong enough about it and you're adamant about it, you must be right. And that's where I see honor comes in. Maybe it's not honorable, but you can make up a story why it is.
Yeah, I think there's so much Star Trek out there now, like 800, 900 hours worth of Star Trek. And I think if you were to pull out every single instance of a Klingon saying this is honorable or this is not honorable, it would be like all over the map, and it would be really hard to find a through line, because it's so, like you're saying, it's so personal to the individual. Like, what is honor? Is it personal honor, or is it Klingon honor, or is it a combination of the two things? Like, I mean, even Worf is consistently inconsistent with what is honorable and what is not honorable. It just, whatever fits the dictates of the story at the time, right? But somehow there's a through line that makes it work. And
I think honor for Klingons is synonymous with saving face.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's a good example too. If you ever read the Code of Bushido, that's a good one. It's a good take. I like that. I always found Worf to be a human's idealization of Klingon honor. So he's being a Klingon. He wants to exemplify Klingon honor, but it's the human's perspective of how to treat honor, but Klingon honor. Worf's always been a fun contradiction. So that's all I really have. You guys got anything else you want to talk about as far as this book goes?
It's a good winter read. That's what I'll say. It's hot chocolate or whiskey read. I'm going to read it again. And I really encourage people to try to play a Klingon game. I was able to play with Fred Love, one of the writers. He ran a Klingon game a couple of weeks back, and I had so much fun. I was like, oh man, I may have to run the entire next phase of the Shackleton Expanse on the Mup wall. So give it a try. You might find yourself leaning toward more Klingon games than Federation games.
I do have one more thing we can talk about before we go. How would you guys use the Klingon book to make Klingons in your Starfleet games more interesting?
Good question.
everything we just talked about, and that's their history. Plus Starfleet Academy. Now they're going to be some of the most rich characters you're going to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we were able to drop in so much lore and information into the Klingon book that I think a Klingon player in a Starfleet game can benefit from it, right? Because there's just so much stuff to work with, and hopefully we packed the Klingon book full of ideas that even if even if you don't use a full-blown Klingon campaign, hopefully there's enough stuff in there that you can at least reference back to it and remember some of the lore that we were able to build in by some of the writers that I was able to pull in and convince to work with me on it. So yeah.
Can I ask one last question real quick? I don't know the answer. Is there a comparable book out there about the Klingons, not RPG related?
The only thing I can think of are like some of the encyclopedia stuff, and then the Klingon, with the Klingon dictionary has a lot of stuff in it. It might be on the shelf over here, actually.
there's the Klingon dictionary that I think Mark Okrand wrote, and there's let me look at my shelf here.
There's a Bird of Prey tech manual.
Yes, the Bird of Prey tech manual is really good. Rick Sternbach wrote a good chunk of that, and we use that as one of our key references in developing the book. Dayton Ward wrote a really good hidden like a travel guide to Klingon, which has a lot of great information in it. And I'm really grateful that I was able to get on his schedule so that he could write some of the stuff in our core book. And plus, he's an old friend of mine from way back, so that was nice. But so there's the Klingon book that he wrote. But as far as like one Klingon book that has like all the lore and all the ships and all the other stuff in it, I'm not sure there's one out there. And I guess if we were going to put a plug in for this book, that even if you're not a Star Trek gamer, this might be worth picking up because it's just got a ton of great Klingon lore in it. And if you're into the novels, right, Dayton Ward and Keith DeCandido, who are two big, longtime Star Trek novelists who write a lot of Klingon stuff, happen to be in this book. So, like, if you like to follow them as writers, why not grab this book and check out what they wrote for us in this as well.
Yeah, that I think it's a fantastic book. It's got a lot of useful information. The only thing it doesn't really have that I didn't see anyways was recipes for like blood wine or Ractagino, but you can find those online too.
I don't know if we put recipes in there, but there's this. Let me find the page here. I've actually got the book up on PDF here right next to me. There's a. It's at the beginning of the Starships chapter. I don't think it's recipes per se, but I gave Sam a sidebar to write, and he went crazy with it in terms of like coming up with different types of Gog and Ract and some other Klingon delicacies that found
was great.
Let me find the.
And how to really, it was like, okay, if you're gonna prepare a meal, like have a Klingon woman over for a date, you better know what to bring.
Know your stuff, yeah, exactly.
And know how to duck.
Partially cooked lamb there's like a raw leg of something. I forgot what that was.
It's page 182. It's the ship's menu. Oh, speaking of which, going back, I know we're running out of time, but one of the things that the Klingon book provides you that the Starfleet book didn't is that you can play the ship's cook. Because the Klingons think that fresh food is really super important, and so a well-fed crew is a more effective crew. And so the ship's cook on a Klingon warship is a prized a prized member of the crew, and like the better cook you've got, the better off you're going to be. And so one of the roles that you can play in the game is the ship's cook, and we were lucky enough to get a great piece of art for that, showing the Klingon in the kitchen doing his thing. Yeah, there you go. And so like if I were to ever have the opportunity to play a Klingon game, I think I might actually play the cook just to do something different. Yeah. And Michael, you mentioned the Klingon the mission briefs. I tried to make sure that there was a mission brief for every single potential role, and I took it upon myself to write the one for the Klingon cook. So
it was good. I read that one. That was really fun. Trying to make something out of nothing. Stone soup. Loved it.
All right. One more thing.
I could go on all day about this book because it's such a huge chunk of my life. I mean, this was more than a year in the making, and there were a lot of good things and bad things happening in my life over the course of that year. That when I get the physical copy, I'm going to have a lot of emotions around it. I mean, looking at the PDF is one thing, but having that physical thing in hand is going to open up a whole bunch of memories. Even before COVID, we were working on this thing, and then COVID just drove everything crazy. But it was absolutely a labor of love for the fans, by fans. And I sure hope you all love it, because we had, I know I had a lot of fun working on it, and I know everybody I brought in to work on it had a blast too. So hopefully everyone really digs it.
Yeah, I think the show is going to give one away as soon as I get my hands on a copy, but I think it'll be fun for everybody to have that. And we'll get into that once I actually get a copy we can give away.
Very cool.
One more thing I think to talk about when playing a Klingon campaign or a Klingon character, as we've talked about a lot in this episode, there's a rich tapestry of culture and subtle nuance that has been laid out over the last 54 years, 787 aired episodes once Discovery Season 3 is over, 11 canon series, 12 movies, countless books. There's information out there for you. If you can, it can be fun to play an over-the-top honor-bound murder hobo marauding around the galaxy, stomping out the triple threat. But don't let yourself fall victim to the idea that all Klingons in the universe are the same way.
Right.
Each series has its own interpretation of the Klingon, and they can all be right at the same time. Your interpretation is no less valid than those. Think about your character's goals and their motivations, and don't create a shallow warrior who fights for nothing but honor, and what that honor could even be. What does honor mean to your character, and why does it mean that? What does their house mean, and what does it mean to them? Are they loyalists to the house, or do they believe empire over all? Are they warriors of Kahless or anything? What's your Klingon willing to die for? And more importantly, what are they willing to live for? Create a meaningful contribution to the thousands of hours that have already been spent bringing Klingons to life in the Star Trek universe, and I'm guessing thousands and thousands of hours that have put into this book alone. Bring the Star Trek Klingons to life in your universe, and you will bring honor to you and your house. And on that note, I think we're going to call it a wrap for tonight. Next time, we're going to talk about how you can start and end your sessions, and get the most out of your group, and ways to engage your players in between sessions. So stay tuned next time for lessons or promise me something. Don't give up. I don't know how to. Oh yeah, promise me something. Don't give up on your music. That's a quote from one of the episodes. I remember that. A quote from the lessons episode. Anyways, until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoy what we're doing, just share this episode with one other person. That's all we ask. Anybody who can get something out of the Star Trek Adventures game, the Klingons in general, anybody. As an off-topic note, when Timothy Zahn was writing the Thrawn trilogy books, they gave him RPG books to write the Star Wars universe. So these books can mean a lot. There's a lot of information in these that you can use. Even if you're not running a game and you want to write a Klingon book for somebody, this book has the information in it for you. Anyways, until then, don't forget, I am your host, as always, Dr. RPG Jeff Harvey, on behalf of myself, my co-host, Michael Zmuke, and our great guest, Jim Johnson, and everybody that works behind the scenes here. Live long and prosper.
Kapla! This is a Klingon show.
Kapla!
Right, kapla!
Oyster blood wine.